Congratulations. Well done. Well deserved. So I'm last, and I know at the 5-minute mark, the lights start to blink. However, I've got a lot to say. So when the lights blink tonight, it could be last call. So, and this is just a wonderful event, and I'm almost giddy. There's a big check mark on the bucket list, and Susie doesn't have to give me anything for Christmas this year either. So, going last, the things that I had expected to say have already been said by other people. Bob Callett recognized everybody on the committee. They were just absolutely outstanding. But the letter that I received was signed by Bob Callett, and I recall he's been a longtime friend. And many, many years ago, he convinced me that I could really find the time to volunteer to coach in Little League and other youth sports. And I think that conversation has a direct impact on my standing at the podium tonight. So thank you, Bob. I, too, would like to recognize all the other inductees. I couldn't ask for a better class. Again, being last, there's some pressure on me to wrap it up. But also there's pressure on me because everybody else was so good. And congratulations to you all. So I would like to recognize the members of my personal Hall of Fame, because you don't get here on your own. And so I'll start with my wife, my beautiful wife of 40 years, Susan. Perfect teammate. She's probably the all-time assist leader in setting up me and all our kids to allow us to do our very best. Our kids are here tonight, Sean, Tim, and Meg. Many of you know they're very good players, but we're more proud of them now that they've become adults. Sean and his wife Maura, who was here a little earlier, have 2 little girls. McKenna, 2, had to go home. But we have Kira here, who's been, I think, done a big hit in the back of the room. So, hello, Kira. Meg has 2 boys, Jalen, who's 6, and Jacoby, who's soon to be 4. And by the way, did I tell everybody that they live in Boston? And Tim, who is completely unattached, is celebrating his 8th year, and that's not trying to get you a date, Tim, but is celebrating his 8th as a big brother to his little brother, Daquan. So I'm very proud of you. The other person at the table is probably the only guy in the room that's got whiter hair than me, and that's my older brother, Jerry. He's been a special role model for me. We lost our father when we were very young, so Jerry taught me a lot of things about life beyond sports, but he certainly gave me a head start because at a very early age I could catch and hit and dribble and shoot and all that type of stuff, and that was an advantage back then. He did provide me with some unique opportunities when I got into grade school and early high school. When he played freshman ball at Providence College, he scrimmaged every day against a backcourt of future pros and future Hall of Famers, and that backcourt was Lenny Wilkins and Johnny Egan. So I had an advantage over a lot of you guys. He passed that knowledge on to me. And I know the room is filled with a lot of Hall of Famers, but I've never heard one of you guys say, geez, I really enjoyed guarding your brother. So thank you. We'd like all of you to remember our older sister, Janet, and I know a few of her friends are in the room. She was a special lady. We lost her 15 years ago. She and her husband raised 5 great kids. She was Classical Teacher of the Year one year in the state of Massachusetts, and we just love her. So, this date, November 22nd, it's been one that our family's always been linked to. 50 years ago, we witnessed the assassination of John F. Kennedy. that was our mother's 57th birthday. So today she'd be 107. I know she's looking down now with a little bit of pride. She's also sending a message, don't get too caught up in yourself and too cocky, but everybody knows that that's too late. So I think the only issue with my mother and my sister was that when they used to go to my games, they'd get excited, and anytime I had the ball, they'd say, shoot. Now I was a point guard. I had the ball a lot. So I don't think the other parents cared for that too much. I was very well positioned to take advantage of all this community had to offer, from Little League through the adult leagues and the Boys and Girls Club. I had success as a player because, quite frankly, I played on some very good teams with very good players. I had success as a coach because, quite frankly, my kids were good and their friends were good. And that can carry a long way. Just ask the coaches that don't have good players. I got off to a good start with playing with some excellent competitors. My best friends in my neighborhood, were Steve Libby and Roland Corbin. Both of them, I guess, Hall of Fame caliber soccer and baseball players. I'd like to follow John Kuchar's lead in that, and I'd like to name a number of mentors and coaches I had. Some of the people that I'm going to mention don't even know I'm going to mention them because they weren't my coaches, but they were supporters, and they'd pass on an encouraging word. So let me rattle them off if I can. Bob Watson, Rex Hamilton, Burr Carlson, Vinnie Punzo, Johnny Floyd, Bob Daly, Dave Mills, Bob Kelly, Bill McCooey, Sip Kavita, Jack Carpenter, Tom Monahan, and by the way, I did want to mention Mr. Reardon. John Reardon the Younger quoted his father, John Sr., who was a legendary Latin teacher relative to my sister. And he said, the Orion boys might be pretty good athletes, but the real MVP in that family is their sister. So did want to talk about some of the guys that I learned with. In addition to my brother, you learn from some of the older players: Terry Burke, Larry Penisell, Gary Palladino, Art Whitehead, Phil Lewis, George Benoit, Bill Greger. Billy, I mentioned you because you're a lefty, right? So. Back then, you had to wait for somebody to lose before you get on the court. That teaches you a life lesson by itself. I played behind guys like Paul Reamer, Mike Lowry, competed against guys like Fran Sarator, Greg Ziogas, Eddie Conlon. And a special mention, I think, is due to Greg Zy and Franny, because they're, I think, the only ones that throughout my entire life, starting in 6th grade, I played against. Always against. Franny was at St. Anthony's, Greg was at O'Connell, I was at Callan. They were both at Bristol Central, I was at Bristol Eastern. I played at Assumption, Franny was at Southern, Greg was at Springfield. And then when we got into the adult leagues, the boys and girls, I was always on the opposite team. So I reflected about, geez, I scored a lot of points against those guys. They scored a lot of points against me. But what remember is when I get up every morning is how many times they fouled me. So, salute for me. If I could tell you briefly about some of the really good teams that I played on, and it won't be a lot. I was fortunate enough to make the Forestville Little League Major League team when I was 8 years old, again due to Jerry's tutelage. We won the league championship that year. I'm sure I didn't carry it. There was a guy by the name of Chopin who happened to be a 12-year-old player. We ended up we lost in the city series to the Cardinals and McCabe Waters, star player Billy Greger. There he is again. Right. We had a very good all-star team. We went to the district finals. We were led by another guy, great player, Dave Seashon. The only problem we had is Dave couldn't pitch every game. So my contribution in the game that we lost, I gave up a grand slam. So. Anyway, there's a theme here, by the way. High school, I do think that, quite frankly, I played on one of the best and deepest teams. We had 5 seniors my year: Billy Kane, Steve Casper, John Archambault, Barry Bishop, and myself. We won the CCIL. We were 18-3. Lost in the state tournament to Brian McMahon in the quarterfinals, just double L. And Brian McMahon was the only team to beat Calvin Murphy's team that year. Our bench, the following year, went undefeated in the CCIL. They were 17-2. They had Bobby Jones, Eddie Whitehead, Bill Turley, Jimmy Ginty, and I'm missing one, Gary Demansky. So anyhow, kudos to them. This town gave me the opportunity to play at a terrific school, Assumption College, nationally ranked Division II basketball school, pretty good education as well. The coaches were legendary. A guy by the name of Andy Lasker played on Holy Cross's NCAA championship team. Joe O'Brien was the coach of the year several times in New England. And the guy that was my freshman coach was Freddie Barricat, who ended up coaching Fairfield for a number of years and then ran the ACC tournament. I played with 7 guys that spanning the period when I was a freshman and the seniors, and then when I was a senior, those guys were freshmen. So that's 7 years. There were 7 guys who scored 1,000 points. I took the ball out. 2 of those guys, Jake Jones, played in the pros for 3 years. Another guy, Tom O'Connor, is the current AD at George Mason, and he's head of the NCAA selection committee. And the year that he was the head, it was the first year that all 4 number 1 seeds were in the Final Four. Now, if I'd only stayed in touch with them, can you think of the great seats I would have had? So, anyhow, I'd like to just maybe talk about a couple of unique games that I participated in. One was in my late 20s, I went back to Worcester and they had a fundraiser. It was the alumni of Assumption playing the alumni of Holy Cross. Now, Assumption had a good program. Holy Cross had a long legacy. So guys that were introduced in that game for Holy Cross, Jack DeShat Foley, George Blaney, Tom Heinsohn didn't play. He was coaching the Celtics, so his son played. And then it got quiet, and then they introduced a guy that they called Mr. Basketball. So I'm humbled tonight to be in the Bristol Sports Hall of Fame, but I was playing against a guy called Mr. Basketball, Bob Cousy. So, end the night maybe with a question, and that would be, what would be the significance of 4 McCarthys, 2 Tierneys, 2 O'Briens, and a Kelly? You're right. That was much of the starting lineup for a softball team sponsored by the Italian Social Club. So, Bristol, right? So I think with the Hall of Fame taking care of the heritage of Bristol sports, and with our sense of humor, there's no wonder why ESPN's across the street. So, thank you all.